Han Ji-woo, a gritty, independent mechanic working in a dead-end garage, has spent her life resenting the man who abandoned her mother with nothing but a handful of cash and the word mistake scrawled on an envelope. That man is Park Jin-woo, now the untouchable dragon of the Seoul underworld. When Jin-woo's armored motorcade breaks down in her neighborhood during a rainstorm, destiny forces a confrontation. Instead of cowering before his guns, Ji-woo mocks his incompetence and refuses to fix his vehicle unless he faces her, not as a boss, but as a father. Intrigued by her audacity and seeing his own lethal spark in her eyes, Jin-woo forcibly recruits her to oversee his syndicate's high-end fleet. As she sabotages his ego and outsmarts his rivals, Jin-woo is forced to reconcile his past cruelty with the realization that the mistake he discarded is the only person capable of saving his empire from an internal coup. The heavy oak door of Park Jin-woo's private office clicked shut, muffling the chaotic sounds of the gala outside. The room smelled of expensive leather and cold ambition. Jin-woo sat behind his massive desk, his face a mask of stone. He didn't look like a father, he looked like a king, deciding the fate of a peasant. Without a word, he pulled a silk-lined checkbook from his breast pocket. His movements were slow and deliberate. He scribbled a number that would make most people's hearts stop, enough money to buy a mansion and a life of luxury. He ripped the check out and slid it across the polished wood. "Take it," Jin-woo said, his voice as sharp as a razor. "This covers 20 years of silence. Go back to your life, Han Ji-woo. Forget this face, and I will forget yours. Consider it a final payment for a mistake I should have erased a long time ago." Ji-woo looked down at the paper. The amount was staggering. For a moment, she thought of her mother's tired hands and the small, leaky apartment they had shared. Then, she looked at the man across from her, the man who thought everything had a price tag. Slowly, she reached for a silver lighter sitting on his desk. With a flick of her thumb, a small flame danced in the dim light. She held the corner of the check to the fire. Jin-woo's eyes widened, his calm facade finally cracking. They both watched in silence as the millions of won turned into black ash, fluttering onto his expensive rug. "You think money fixes a broken soul?" Ji-woo asked, her voice steady and cold. "You called me a mistake. You told the world I was a weakness. But right now, the press is outside asking why the dragon of Seoul abandoned his own blood. Your stocks are dropping, and your partners are whispering. You don't need a daughter, Park Jin-woo. You need a miracle." She leaned forward, placing her hands on his desk. "I don't want your money. I want a seat at your executive table. I'm an investigative journalist, I know where every one of your bodies is buried and how to spin the truth. I am the only one who can fix your reputation before your enemies use me to tear you down." Jin-woo leaned back, his knuckles white as he gripped his flesh. He saw the fire in his eyes, a fire he recognized because he saw it in the mirror every morning. "You want to step into the viper's nest?" he whispered. "I was born in the nest you built," she replied with a sharp smile. "Move over, father. It's time the mistake started running the show." The glass doors of the Dragon Syndicate's main office slid open with a quiet hiss. Han Ji-woo walked in, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor. She wasn't wearing an expensive suit or sparkling jewelry. She wore a simple, dark blazer and a look of total confidence. Behind her, two of Park Jin-woo's largest bodyguards followed, looking confused about why they were taking orders from a girl half their size. Upstairs, in the grand conference room, the air was thick with tension. 6 of Jin-woo's top directors sat around a long glass table. These were men who had spent decades building a criminal empire, and they weren't happy. At the head of the table sat Park Jin-woo, his eyes unreadable. This is a joke, one director grumbled, slamming his hand on the table. We are in the middle of a massive PR disaster, and you bring in a child to handle our image? She's a mistake from the past, Jin-Woo. She doesn't belong here. Ji-woo didn't wait to be invited. She pulled out a chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down. She tossed a thick folder into the center of the glass. If I'm a mistake, then your last 3 quarterly reports are disasters, Ji-woo said, her voice calm but loud enough to command the room. You've been trying to hide your illegal shipping routes behind a fake charity, but you're doing it poorly. The tax office is already watching 3 of your shell companies. If you don't change your strategy in the next 48 hours, the dragon will be behind bars, and you'll all be jobless. The room went dead silent. The directors looked at the papers in the folder. She had found secrets that even their best lawyers hadn't spotted. She wasn't just a journalist, she was a predator who knew exactly where to bite. Jin-Woo watched her, a small, dark spark of pride flickering in his chest. He had spent his whole life thinking family was a weakness, but here she was, using his own cold logic to terrify men twice her age. She was dismantling their excuses one by one, showing them that she knew their business better than they did. I'm not here to be your daughter, Ji-woo said, looking directly at Jin-Woo. And I'm not here to be a consultant who tells you what you want to hear. I'm here to fix the mess you made. Because I'm the only one with the guts to tell you the truth. She stood up and leaned over the table, her shadow falling across the men who had just insulted her. From now on, every press release, every contract, and every public move goes through me. If anyone has a problem with that, you can explain it to the police when they show up at your front door tomorrow morning. One by one, the directors looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Ji-woo turned and walked out of the room without looking back. She had survived her first day in the Viper's nest, and for the first time in 20 years, Park Jin-woo realized he might have finally met his match. The office atmosphere had changed within a week. The employees no longer whispered about the boss's daughter, they whispered about the boss's nightmare. Ji-woo moved through the headquarters like a storm, and today, that storm was heading straight for Park Jin-woo's weekly strategy meeting. The room was filled with Jin-woo's top lieutenants, men who handled the syndicate's most difficult tasks. They were bragging about a new deal to buy a massive piece of land for a new hotel. Jin-Woo sat at the head of the table, nodding in approval as his lead negotiator, Mr. Choi, explained the plan. It's a perfect deal, boss, Mr. Choi said, smiling proudly. We're getting the land for half the price because the current owners are desperate. It's a perfect trap, Ji-woo interrupted, swinging the door open. She walked to the front of the room and dropped a single sheet of paper over the map on the table. That land is protected by new environmental laws that haven't been made public yet. If you buy it, you'll be stuck with a swamp you can't build on, and the government will fine you billions of won. Mr. Choi's face turned bright red. You don't know what you're talking about. We've checked everything. Ji-woo didn't even look at him. She looked directly at her father. I checked the city's private archives. Your experts missed it because they were too busy trying to impress you. It's a rookie mistake. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a cold, steady whisper that echoed in the silent room. Kind of like the mistake you made 20 years ago when you thought I wouldn't amount to anything. It seems you have a habit of overlooking the things that actually matter. The lieutenants looked at their feet, terrified. No one had ever spoken to the Dragon of Seoul like that. Jin-Woo's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening so hard a vein began to throb in his temple. He had built this empire on being right, but here was the daughter he had rejected, proving him wrong in front of his entire inner circle. Mr. Choi, leave, Jin-Woo commanded. All of you, out. As the men scrambled to exit the room, Ji-woo stayed behind, casually picking up a pen from the desk. She waited until the door clicked shut before she spoke again. That's twice in 1 week I've saved you from losing your fortune, father. At this rate, I'm starting to think you're the one who needs a consultant to survive. Jin-Woo stood up, walking toward her until they were only inches apart. He was trying to tower over her, but Ji-Woo didn't flinch. You're making a habit of humiliating me, he growled. I'm just making you eat your words, she replied, a sharp, victorious glint in her eyes. One bite at a time. How do they taste so far? Jin-Woo didn't answer, but for the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked like a man realizing that his biggest mistake was the most powerful weapon he ever created. The black luxury sedan looked like a spaceship in the middle of the crumbling neighborhood. Park Jin-Woo sat in the back seat, his expensive silk suit contrasting sharply with the cracked pavement and the smell of rotting garbage outside. He hadn't been to this part of Seoul in 20 years. He had spent his whole life running away from the shadows of these narrow alleys. Why are we here? Jin-Woo asked, his voice stiff. He stared out the tinted window at a group of elderly women washing vegetables in plastic tubs on the sidewalk. Ji-Woo didn't answer until she parked the car in front of a rusted iron gate. This is where my mother died, she said quietly. In a room smaller than your walk-in closet. While you were building your towers of glass and steel, she was working 3 jobs to pay for the heat. She hopped out of the car, and Jin-Woo had no choice but to follow. His polished shoes stepped over puddles of gray water. Every person they passed looked tired and worn down. This was the world Jin-Woo had deleted from his memory. He felt a strange, cold lump in his throat as they walked up a flight of stairs that groaned under their weight. Ji-Woo stopped in front of a peeling green door. She kept that envelope, she said, her voice trembling just a little. The one where you wrote mistake. She kept it because it was the only thing she had that belonged to you. She used it as a bookmark for the stories she read to me at night. Jin-Woo looked at the door. He remembered a younger version of himself standing right here, full of ambition and cruelty. He had thought that leaving this place meant he had won. But looking at Ji-Woo's face, he realized he had only lost. He saw the ghost of the woman he had abandoned in the way Ji-Woo held her head high despite the poverty surrounding her. I gave her money, Jin-Woo whispered, though it sounded like an excuse even to him. You gave her a way out, but you didn't give her a reason to stay, Ji-Woo snapped. She turned to face him, the orange glow of the setting sun hitting her eyes. You called me a mistake. Because you were afraid I'd pull you back down to this. But look at me. I survived this place. Without you. Who's the weak one now? For the first time, Jin-Woo couldn't look her in the eye. He reached out to touch the rusted railing, his fingers coming away with orange dust. He was the most powerful man in the city, but standing in this hallway, he felt small. The silence between them was heavy with 20 years of unspoken apologies. Let's go, Ji-Woo said, turning back toward the stairs. I just wanted you to see the ghost you've been running from. She isn't scary. She's just disappointed. As they walked back to the car, Jin-Woo didn't look at the buildings. He looked at his daughter. The mistake was the only real thing he had left in a world full of fake friends and expensive lies. The drive back from the old neighborhood was silent. Park Jin-Woo sat in the shadows of the back seat, his mind still stuck in that narrow, rusted hallway. He was the dragon, a man who never looked back, yet his daughter's words had left a visible crack in his armor. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about his next business deal, he was thinking about the woman he had left behind. The silence was shattered by a sudden, deafening thud. A heavy delivery truck swerved out of a side street, slamming into the lead escort car. The motorcade screeched to a halt. Before Jin-Woo's bodyguards could even draw their weapons, two black motorcycles sped toward them. The riders pulled out submachine guns, the muzzles flashing in the dark. "Get down!" Jin-Woo shouted, reaching over to pull Ji-Woo toward the floor. But Ji-Woo wasn't cowering. Her eyes were darting around, scanning the street like a professional scout. She saw the shooters, but she also saw something they didn't, a construction crane hovering over the road just ahead, holding a heavy load of steel pipes. "The driver is hit," she screamed as the car began to roll aimlessly. The man behind the wheel slumped over, his shoulder bleeding. The motorcycle circled for the kill, aiming at the tinted windows where Jin-Woo sat. In a heartbeat, Ji-Woo scrambled over the center console. She shoved the unconscious driver aside and grabbed the steering wheel. Her hands were covered in grease and blood, but they didn't shake. "What are you doing?" Jin-Woo roared as bullets sparked off the armored glass. "Saving your life so I can finish ruining it myself," she yelled back. She didn't drive away. Instead, she floored the gas and steered the heavy sedan directly toward the construction site. One of the bikers followed, thinking he had her trapped. Just as they passed under the crane, Ji-Woo reached out and slammed her fist into the car's emergency siren and high-beam controls, creating a blinding flash and a piercing noise. The sudden distraction caused the crane operator, who had been ducking for cover, to accidentally release the brake. The heavy steel pipes came crashing down. They didn't hit the car, but they created a massive barrier of twisted metal that crushed the motorcycle behind them and blocked the entire street. Ji-Woo twisted the wheel, pulling the car into a narrow alleyway and killing the lights. They sat in the pitch black, the only sound being the ticking of the cooling engine and their own heavy breathing. Jin-Woo looked at his daughter. Her face was pale, and her hands were finally starting to tremble, but she had just done what a dozen trained guards couldn't. She had saved him. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "You hate me. You want to see me fall. Why didn't you just let them take me?" Ji-Woo wiped a streak of blood from her forehead and looked at him with a tired, sharp smile. "Because if you die now, you die thinking you were right. I need you alive so you can watch me prove you were wrong about everything." Jin-Woo leaned back, completely confused. He had spent his life surrounded by people who stayed for money or fear. He had never met someone who would save his life out of pure, stubborn spite. The tension inside the Dragon Syndicate was no longer a whisper, it was a cold wind blowing through the halls. Park Jin-Woo's second-in-command, a sharp-faced man named Sang-dae, had stood by Jin-Woo's side for 15 years. He had expected to inherit the throne. Now, he watched as a young woman with grease under her fingernails sat in the meetings he used to lead. Sang-dae gathered the elders of the syndicate in a smoky basement club, far from Jin-Woo's watchful eyes. He threw a folder onto the table containing Ji-Woo's birth certificate and photos of the mistake envelope. "Our leader has gone soft," Sang-dae hissed, his eyes gleaming with malice. "He is letting a girl, a bastard with no loyalty to our bloodline, run our business. She knows our secrets. She is a journalist. How long until she sells us all to the police to get her revenge? Jin-Woo has chosen a mistake over his own men." The next morning, the coup began. When Jin-Woo walked into the boardroom, he didn't find his usual loyal staff. He found Sang-dae standing at the head of the table, flanked by the syndicate's most dangerous enforcers. The air felt heavy, like the moments before a thunderstorm. "You need to step down, Jin-Woo," Sang-dae said, his voice dripping with fake pity. "The men are restless. They don't trust a leader who brings his dirty laundry into the counting room. You broke the rules of the street when you brought her here." Jin-Woo looked around the room. He saw men he had fed and protected for years looking away. In shame. For the first time, his authority was truly crumbling. Suddenly, the door swung open. Ji-woo walked in, carrying 2 cups of cheap coffee. She didn't look scared, she looked bored. She walked straight to Sang-dae and set a coffee in front of him. "You're making a big speech about loyalty, Sang-dae," Ji-woo said, leaning against the table. "But you forgot one thing. I'm a journalist. I don't just find my father's secrets. I found yours, too." She pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket and pressed play. Sang-dae's own voice filled the room, discussing a secret deal to sell the syndicate's shipping routes to their biggest rivals. The elders gasped. The bastard daughter had caught the loyal second-in-command in a lie. "You aren't worried about my bloodline," Ji-woo said, her voice turning cold as ice. "You're worried that I'm smart enough to see you're a traitor. You call me a mistake? A mistake is someone who trusts a snake like you." Jin-Woo stood up, his towering shadow falling over a shaking Sang-dae. He didn't look at his traitorous friend, he looked at Ji-Woo. He finally realized that blood wasn't just about a name, it was about who stood by you when the world turned dark. "Get him out of my sight," Jin-Woo commanded. As the guards dragged Sang-dae away, Jin-Woo turned to his daughter. The mistake had just saved his empire for the second time. The victory over Sang-dae was short-lived. A snake cornered is more dangerous than a snake in the grass. Only hours after being dragged away, Sang-dae's hidden loyalists ambushed Ji-Woo as she left the office. By the time Park Jin-Woo found out, his daughter was gone, and his phone was buzzing with a video call that made his blood run cold. On the screen, Ji-Woo was tied to a chair in the center of a massive, decaying warehouse. In the background, stacks of wooden crates, holding the syndicate's most valuable illegal cargo. And the deeds to his entire empire were already catching fire. "You have 10 minutes, Jin-Woo." Sang-dae's voice screamed through the speaker, though he was nowhere to be seen. "The fire is moving fast. The documents and the money are on the north side. The girl is in the south. You can only save one. Choose your legacy, or choose your mistake." Jin-Woo roared as he drove his car through the warehouse's locked gates. The heat inside was like a physical wall. Thick, black smoke swirled toward the ceiling. To his left, he saw the vault where his life's work was stored. If those papers burned, he would be nobody. He would lose the power he had spent 20 years building. To his right, through a curtain of orange flames, he saw Ji-Woo. She wasn't screaming. Even with smoke stinging her lungs, she looked at him with those same defiant eyes. For a split second, the dragon hesitated. He looked at the vault. Then, he remembered the small, green door in the slums and the mother who had died in the cold. He realized that a pile of paper wasn't a legacy. A legacy was the person who was brave enough to tell him the truth. "To hell with the business," Jin-Woo growled. He ignored the vault and sprinted toward the flames. He used his designer coat to shield his face as he leapt over a burning beam. The heat singed his hair and blistered his skin, but he didn't stop until he reached Ji-Woo. With a pocketknife, he hacked at the ropes binding her wrists. "You're losing everything," Ji-Woo coughed, her voice raspy from the smoke. "The deeds, the money, it's all going." Jin-Woo grabbed her hand and pulled her toward his chest, shielding her from a falling piece of the roof. "Let it burn," he said, his voice sounding different than it ever had before, softer, yet stronger. "I already lost you once. I'm not that stupid a second time." They burst through the exit just as the roof over the north wing collapsed, swallowing the Dragon Syndicate's fortune in a roar of fire. Jin-Woo collapsed on the wet pavement, gasping for air, his expensive suit ruined and blackened. Ji-Woo sat beside him, watching the building glow. Against the night sky. He had chosen the mistake. And as the empire he loved turned to ash, Park Jin-Woo felt, for the first time in his life, like he had finally made the right move. The sirens of fire trucks wailed in the distance, but the alleyway behind the warehouse was strangely quiet. Rain began to fall, clicking against the hot pavement and sending steam rising into the air. Park Jin-Woo leaned against the side of his car, his chest heaving. His face was streaked with soot, and the sleeve of his once perfect suit was burned away, revealing a nasty red mark on his arm. Ji-woo sat on the bumper, shivering. She looked at the glowing ruins of the building. The fire had taken the records of the syndicate, the secret accounts, and the physical proof of her father's power. She looked at him, waiting for the anger. She expected him to yell, to blame her, or to regret his choice. Instead, Jin-Woo reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, charred object. It was the yellowed childhood photo Ji-Woo had tossed on his table at the gala. He had gone back for it before the roof fell. "Why did you keep that?" Ji-Woo asked, her voice a low whisper. "It's just a piece of paper. It's not worth anything." Jin-Woo looked at the photo, then at his daughter. For the first time in his life, the dragon looked human. The coldness in his eyes had been washed away by the fire and the rain. He walked over to her, his footsteps heavy. He didn't stand over her to look tall, he sat down on the wet ground right next to her. "I spent 20 years thinking that being a man meant never having a weakness," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel. "I thought your mother was a mistake because she made me feel soft. I thought you were a mistake because you reminded me of a life I wanted to forget." He stopped, closing his eyes tightly. A single tear tracked through the soot on his cheek. "But tonight, while the fire was burning, I realized something," he continued. "The money didn't fight for me. The documents didn't save me. You did. You, the person I tried to erase." He turned to her, and for once, he didn't look away. "Ji-Woo, I called you a mistake. I said I didn't have time for you. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong." The words hung in the air, heavier than the smoke. Ji-Woo felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent years imagining this moment, thinking she would laugh at him or walk away. But seeing him broken and honest made her anger melt into something else. She didn't forgive him. Yet, 20 years of pain don't disappear in a minute, but she reached out and took the charred photo from his hand. "It took a long time for you to see it," she said softly. "I know," Jin-Woo replied. "I'm a slow learner. But I'm listening now." 6 months after the fire, the city skyline looked the same, but the heart of the Dragon Syndicate had changed forever. The dark, windowless rooms where men once whispered about illegal deals were gone. In their place stood a bright, glass-walled office in the center of Seoul. The sign on the door no longer carried the syndicate's old crest, it simply said Park and Han Logistics. Park Jin-Woo sat in his new office, wearing a simple sweater instead of his stiff, intimidating suits. On his desk, there were no secret ledgers or hidden weapons. Instead, there was a framed photo of his daughter and a stack of papers for a new scholarship foundation for children. In his old neighborhood, he was no longer the dragon that people feared. He was a man trying to do better. A familiar knock echoed on the door, and Ji-Woo walked in. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee and a laptop. She looked comfortable, her eyes bright with the excitement of their new project. She had spent the last few months helping her father shut down his old, dangerous businesses and turning the legal ones into something honest. "The last of the offshore accounts have been closed," Ji-Woo said, sitting across from him. "Every cent of the old money has been donated to the hospitals and schools in the slums. We're officially clean, father." Jin-Woo looked at her and smiled. It wasn't the scary, cold smile of a boss, but the proud smile of a father. It's a smaller empire, he admitted. We aren't the most powerful people in the city anymore. Power doesn't mean much if you have to hide it in the shadows, Ji-woo replied, leaning back. Now, when people hear the name Park, they don't look for the nearest exit. They think of a family that actually gives back. Jin-Woo stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. He had spent his whole life building a throne of ice, only to realize that it was melting the entire time. It had taken his mistake to show him how to build something that would actually last. I used to think my legacy was about how many people bowed to me, Jin-Woo said quietly. He turned back to her, his voice steady. But I was wrong again. My legacy isn't the buildings or the money. It's you. Ji-woo stood up and joined him at the window. For 20 years, they had been worlds apart, separated by pride and pain. But as they stood together, watching the sun rise over a city they were helping to heal, the word mistake was finally forgotten. Ji-woo had made him eat his words, and in return, he had given her the one thing she never thought she'd have, a father she could be proud of. They weren't starting over from scratch, they were starting over from the truth. And this time, they were doing it together.